Hey guys, hope you're doing well. So today I'll be making a video on synchronicity, what it is, how it might work, and its significance. So synchronicity is the simultaneous occurrence of events that are acausally connected, or they're not connected by any discernible way, but they are meaningful nonetheless. So an example of this would be if I'm sitting home and I'm thinking about a friend I haven't talked to in 15 years. And then suddenly, as I'm thinking about this, that friend calls me. That is an example of a synchronicity because there's no causal explanation why there would have been a simultaneous occurrence between my thought and the phone call, and yet it's extremely meaningful to the person. So this was of great interest to Carl Jung, who was a major founder in psychiatry. He wrote a lot about this, and he recorded a particularly fascinating example involving plum pudding and a Mr. Deschamps. Now, this was actually recorded by an Austrian biologist by the name of Paul Kramerer, and he was writing a book on what he called seriality, which was sort of a precursor of synchronicity. And in this record, Mr. Deschamps was at a dinner party late in life in France, and he was recalling how he had first discovered plum pudding through a friend by the name of Mr. Floren back when they were kids. Now, 10 years after that encounter, when him and Mr. Floren disconnected and their lives moved on, Mr. Deschamps went into a bakery in Paris and he asked for some plum pudding, but the baker told him that the last batch was actually sold to a Mr. Floren. So now, many, many years later, he's at this dinner party. They're about to serve some plum pudding. He's recounting this event. And he says, jokingly, the only thing that's missing is Mr. Floren himself. And as he says that, the door to the restaurant bursts open, and here comes in a very, very old man, apparently walking through the wrong door, and it was nonetheless Mr. Floren. So this is a very interesting example because it contains a series of synchronicities over many decades, and it suggests again that despite there being what we perceive as random events, that all things may in fact be connected. Now the question is, how can random events lead to this synchronistic connectivity? Or how can chaos lead to order? How can there be this convergence of these events? Well, there's a couple analogies we can find in the real world. Now, here is what's called the formation of a Barnard cell. If you take a container of a liquid and you begin to heat it up, the heat will cause the molecules inside to begin to vibrate faster and move around faster, and you create a chaotic system. But eventually, as the heat increases, the chaos emerges order in the formation of these Barnard cells, which begin to form on the surface of the liquid. So they start to form these hexagonal shapes on the surface. And so we can see that it's actually very real and very possible that a chaotic system can give rise to order. Now, another great example, if you think of the wave that can form at a stadium with thousands of people in it, the wave becomes its own manifestation. Individuals come together to create an ordered event. The event expresses itself through each individual, and each individual contains the whole, so to speak. So if we go back to some physics now, because this phenomenon not only interested Carl Jung, but it also interested this physicist by the name of Wolfgang Pauli. And these two men dialogued over this phenomena because they felt that this phenomena can unify psychiatry and physics, or in other words, it can unify consciousness and matter. If we can unpack how it's possible that the mental world and the physical world can converge in this unity, we can unpack reality itself. So the way we have to first understand this is to decouple the Newtonian worldview by going over what's called the double slit experiment. Now, the double slit experiment was meant to try to determine what is light? How does light manifest? Is it a particle or is it a wave? Now, this is a simple experiment to do that because if it is a wave, it forms multiple bands. But if it's a particle, it would form only two bands. And what we found is that photons and atoms themselves have a wave-particle duality. Okay, it's a very mysterious phenomena. It's very fascinating. If you're not familiar with it, definitely look into it. I made a brief video on it called the quantum enigma. But what's more interesting is that it also proves that at the foundation of reality are not particles. The particles are the manifestation of what's called the wave function. The wave function represents the mathematical probability of where a particular particle can be found, not where it is, because the particle technically does not exist until it is observed. So underlying each particle is this structure, so to speak. And it is from this structure that matter emerges. Just like we saw how the Bernard cells emerge from the chaotic system or the container of water that's being heated. The interesting part is that if this structure that underlies matter manifests matter, then there must be this same structure manifesting consciousness. And so we can now begin to bridge the two through its source, whatever this structure may be. Now, herein comes the work of David Bohm. David Bohm was a quantum physicist, and he developed a mechanical theory in quantum physics dealing with active intelligence. So his theory was that a particle does not exhibit a wave-particle duality, but rather there's a complicated structure that underlies the particle. And instead of randomness, there is this active intelligence, what he termed, that sort of guides the particle where to go, the way that a radar signal can guide a ship where to go in sea. He also worked on the concept of unfolding and enfolding. So sort of like how in the wave at a stadium, the wave is unfolded through each individual, and each individual enfolds the wave. So there's a connection between the whole and the particular part, or a connection between the one and the many. This dynamic unity between the two, where each contains the whole, each individual contains the whole, and the whole contains the individual. So the importance of this can be metaphorically described in what's called a soliton. Now, a soliton is a single wave that's formed by the dynamic processes of the ocean. Basically, the wave of water is the product of the overall motion of the ocean. And this is a really great analogy for us because we see ourselves as individuals disconnected from each other, disconnected from nature, but in fact, we are all connected. There is no disconnection between mind and matter. There is no disconnection between myself and yourself. There is no disconnection between humanity and reality. There is all this single connectivity. So the solution that this suggests is that the disconnection between mind and matter is an illusion of sorts, sort of along the lines that you might see in certain Eastern philosophies. And so the question is, how can we rediscover ourselves again? Well, part of the answer can be found in certain primitive societies or societies that maintained a lifestyle of hunter and gatherers. Because they never disconnected themselves from nature, they had a certain concept of time as an eternal present. They didn't have a concept of a division between mind and matter. And the tribe, this concept of wholeness, maintained itself. So what might be possible is that a lot of these phenomena we find in tribal records, big dreams and whatnot, magical realities, might be reflections more of that this segment of humanity has retained a lifestyle that is more in tune with synchronicity. So, as rather we experience synchronicity as a rare, solitary event, because their lives are more harmonious with nature, synchronicity is their life itself. They are overflowing with synchronicities. And this is something I notice with myself when I delve into spirituality and certain other means of connectiveness, that synchronicities in my life arise. And so I think the solution here is to break down the boundaries between mind and matter, the boundaries between individual and rest of humanity, and the boundary between humanity and nature. There is this underlying connectivity that connects us all, and synchronicities are simply a manifestation of the fact that modern people have atrophied abilities or latent abilities that can be rediscovered. And the increase in synchronicity is probably a suggestion that you're on the right path.